The village of Nola was always full of life. Nestled between rolling green hills and the great Omuga River, it was a place of bustling trade and deep traditions. Every morning, as the golden sun rose, the marketplace came alive with the voices of traders, the laughter of children, and the rhythmic beats of distant drums. Women with bright, patterned wraps balanced baskets of fruit on their heads, while men gathered to trade cattle and handcrafted goods. The air smelled of roasted yams, fresh herbs, and the distant scent of rain-soaked earth. Among the many voices in the market, one name was whispered often: Ayana. She was known not just for her beauty but for her kindness and grace. Her deep brown eyes carried warmth, and her long, intricately braided hair was always adorned with tiny beads that clicked softly as she moved. She walked alongside her mother, Mama Julia, selling ripe mangoes and groundnuts under a wide acacia tree. Despite her delicate frame, Ayana was strong, never shying away from hard work. But there was something else about her, something that had caught the eye of a certain hunter. His name was Keanu. He was not a man of wealth, nor did he belong to any noble family. He was a hunter, a man of the wild, known for his skill with a bow and his deep knowledge of the forest. His skin was darkened by the sun, his muscles carved by years of tracking prey. He carried himself with quiet confidence, rarely speaking unless necessary. The villagers respected him, but he was an outsider in many ways, always drifting between the village and the untamed wilderness beyond. For weeks, Keanu had been watching Iona from a distance. He never spoke to her, never approached, but his eyes always found her in the crowd. He had seen the way she helped an elderly woman carry her heavy basket, the way she laughed freely with the other market girls, the way she moved like the soft wind that rustled through the trees. At first, Iona had not noticed him. She was too busy selling fruits, haggling with customers, and tending to her mother's store. But one day, something changed. She was arranging mangoes in neat piles when she felt a gaze on her. She turned instinctively and caught his eyes, dark, piercing, filled with something she could not quite name. The moment lasted only a breath before Keanu quickly looked away, pretending to inspect a bundle of dried herbs at a nearby store. Iona felt her heart skip a beat. For the first time, she truly saw him. And from that day forward, she became aware of him. Every time she was in the market, she could sense his presence. Sometimes, when she turned, she would find him looking, only for him to avert his gaze in quiet embarrassment. But as the days passed, his stolen glances turned into something more, a silent conversation. She found herself stealing glances too. She didn't know why, but there was something about him that intrigued her. He was different from the young men of the village who dressed in fine robes and boasted about their father's wealth. Keanu was quiet, strong, and carried an air of mystery. He never laughed loudly like the others, never wasted words. And yet, he watched her as if she was the only thing that mattered. One day, after many stolen glances, Iona made a bold decision. She waited until the market was less crowded. Taking a deep breath, she stepped away from her mother's stall and walked toward Keanu's corner, where he was arranging freshly hunted antelope meat. Her heart pounded. Keanu looked up, startled. His hands, rough from years of hunting, froze mid-motion. For the first time, Iona spoke to him. "How much is the meat?" she asked softly. Keanu blinked, caught off guard. He had never expected her to come to him, let alone speak. His heart thundered in his chest. "Oh, it's 5 cowries," he finally said, his voice deeper than usual. Iona smiled, a small knowing smile, before nodding. "Thank you, Keanu." And then, just as quickly, she turned and walked back to her store. Keanu watched her go, his world forever changed. From that day on, something undeniable had begun between them. But love in Nola was never simple. And neither of them knew that their silent romance was about to set events into motion that would change their lives forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Iona had ever experienced. Each morning, as she walked to the market with her mother, her heart beat a little faster, knowing that he would be there. She no longer had to search for Keanu. He was always waiting, always watching, his gaze full of something she couldn't explain. And then, the stolen glances turned into something more. When Iona passed by Keanu's store, there was a brief smile, a fleeting moment where their eyes met and the world around them faded. They never spoke beyond that first conversation, but something powerful had already begun between them, a silent understanding, a love that had not yet been spoken but was already alive. In Dollar, love was not a secret for long. The market women, always eager for gossip, began to notice the way Keanu and Iona looked at each other. The whisper started, "Have you seen how the hunter watches Iona?" And soon, even the elders took note. One day, Iona's best friend, Zubri, pulled her aside as they stacked mangoes at the store. "Iona," she whispered, glancing toward Keanu's store. "I see the way you look at him." Iona's hands stilled. "Look at who?" she asked, though she knew exactly who Zubri meant. Zubri scoffed. "You know who?" "The hunter." "Keanu." Iona felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "We barely speak." Zubri gave her a knowing look. "Iona, in this village, words are not the only way people speak. The way he watches you, the way you glance at him, it is more than enough for people to notice." Iona swallowed. "Do you think my father will hear of this?" Zubri's face grew serious. "If he does, it will not be good." Iona's father, Chief Omori, was a man of great pride and tradition. As the leader of Nola, he had big dreams for his daughter. He wanted her to marry well, not to a simple hunter, but to a man of wealth and status. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chief Omori returned from a meeting with the wealthiest merchant in the village, Borosa's father. Barisa was a man of fine clothes, polished manners, and a fortune that stretched across many villages. At dinner, as Iona served her father and brothers, Chief Omori cleared his throat. "Iona," he said, setting down his wooden cup. "I have received wonderful news." She looked up. "What news, Baba?" "A fine young man has shown interest in you," he said proudly. "Barisa, the son of a great trader, wishes to marry you. He has wealth, lands, and the means to provide for you better than any man in this village." Iona's heart sank. She had heard of Barisa. He was well known in the village for his riches, but also for his arrogance. He was nothing like Keanu. He did not move with quiet strength, nor did his gaze hold the same warmth. Iona gripped the edge of the table. "Baba, I do not wish to marry him." Chief Omari's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "This is a great opportunity for you." Iona hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Baba, I have already found someone I care for." The room fell silent. Her father's face darkened. "Who?" Iona lowered her gaze. "Keanu." At that moment, the air in the hut grew heavy. Chief Omari's jaw tightened. "Keanu," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "The hunter." Iona nodded, her heart pounding. Her father slammed his fist against the table, making the dishes shake. "That man is not fit for you," he roared. "He has no wealth, no name. He is just a man of the wild, living off the land like an animal. You will not disgrace this family by choosing him." Iona's eyes filled with tears. "But Baba, I love him." Chief Omari's face turned red with anger. "Love is part. Love does not fill an empty stomach. Love does not build a future. You will marry Barisa, and that is final." Iona's world shattered. That night, she lay on her mat, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She could not imagine a life with Barisa, could not bear to be separated from Keanu. But what choice did she have? The next evening, when the market had emptied and the sky was painted with deep shades of purple, Iona made a decision. She wrapped a thin shawl around herself and slipped out of her family's hut, her heart hammering. Moving swiftly through the quiet village, she made her way to the river where she knew Keanu often went to wash after his hunts. And there he was. Keanu stood by the water, his broad shoulders glistening in the moonlight, his bow resting beside him. When he saw Iona, his eyes widened with concern. "Iona, what are you doing here?" he asked, stepping closer. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "My father, he has promised me to another man." Keanu's entire body stiffened. "Who?" "Barisa," she whispered. A storm raged in Keanu's eyes. He clenched his fist, struggling to control his anger. "Does this mean we cannot be together?" Iona felt her heart breaking. "Baba will never allow it," she said softly. "He believes you are not worthy." Keanu looked away, his jaw tightening. "And what do you believe, Iona?" She stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "I believe that no man in this village, no matter how rich, could ever make me feel the way you do." Keanu turned to her, his gaze filled with emotion. "Then run away with me," he said suddenly. Iona's breath caught. "What?" "Come with me," Keanu said, his voice firm. "We will leave Nola, go deep into the forest where no one can find us. We will make a new life together, far from the rules of this village." Iona stared at him, torn between fear and love. If she stayed, she would be forced into a loveless marriage. If she left, she would be cast out of her home, her family. Could she truly abandon everything for love? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying their unspoken words into the night. And as Keanu held her hand, she knew that a decision had to be made. A choice that would change their fate forever. The weight of the decision hung heavy in Iona's heart. She stood beside Keanu under the silver glow of the moon, his strong hands holding hers tightly. His words echoed in her mind, "Run away with me." Could she do it? Could she leave her family, her village, and the life she had always known? Keanu's eyes searched hers, full of hope and desperation. "Iona, we cannot let them control our future." She hesitated, fear clawing at her chest. "But my father. If we leave, he will never forgive me." Keanu cupped her face gently. "Your father may control this village, but he does not control your heart." Tears welled in Iona's eyes. She loved Keanu, but the thought of being cast out by her own father terrified her. She needed time to think, to find another way. "I will give you my answer tomorrow night," she whispered. "Meet me here when the moon is full." Keanu nodded, though the worry in his eyes remained. As Iona slipped back into the village, she prayed for a miracle, but fate had already set its course. The next morning, as Iona helped her mother at the market, she sensed something was wrong. People whispered as she passed, their eyes darting toward her, their voices hushed. Even Zubri avoided looking at her directly. And then she saw him. Her father, Chief Omari, standing with Barisa at the center of the marketplace. Her heart pounded. "Iona," her father's voice boomed, silencing the entire market. Everyone turned to watch. Iona's hands trembled as she stepped forward. "Yes, Baba." Chief Omari's eyes burned with fury. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Have you been sneaking away to meet the hunter?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Iona's breath caught in her throat. How did he know? She stammered, but before she could speak, her father turned to the villagers. "This girl, my daughter, has brought shame upon our family," his voice thundered. Instead of preparing for her future, she has been entertaining a man unworthy of her. The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads. Others exchanged knowing glances. Iona clenched her fist. Boba, please, let me explain. There is nothing to explain. Chief Omari roared. He turned to Barisa. Tomorrow, Iona will be your wife. This foolishness ends now. Tears burned in Iona's eyes. You cannot force me to marry him. Chief Omari stepped forward, his presence towering over her. You will do as I say. Iona swallowed back a sob. I love Keanu, she whispered, barely able to say the words aloud. Her father's face darkened. Barisa smirked, crossing his arms. Love, he sneered. What will love give you, Iona? A life of chasing animals in the forest. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Humiliated, Iona ran. She pushed through the people, ignoring their whispers, ignoring their stares, and ran as fast as she could. She did not stop until she reached the only place that felt safe, the river where Keanu waited. Keanu saw her running toward him, tears streaming down her face, and immediately knew they had been discovered. Iona, he caught her as she collapsed into his arms. What happened? She clung to him, her breath ragged. They know. My father. He has ordered me to marry Barisa tomorrow. Keanu's body tensed. No, he said firmly. I won't let them take you from me. Iona looked up at him, her eyes filled with despair. What do we do, Keanu? My father will never change his mind. Keanu took a deep breath. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the reality was even harder than he imagined. We leave, he said, determination in his voice. Tonight. Before the sun rises. Iona's heart pounded. But if we run, we can never return, she whispered. I will lose my family, my home, everything. Keanu gently held her face. And if you stay, what will you have? A life with a man you do not love. A future built on someone else's wishes. Iona closed her eyes. She thought of her father, her mother, her childhood memories in the village. But then she thought of a life with Keanu, a life where she was free, where love was enough. And in that moment, she knew her choice had already been made. Take me with you, she whispered. Keanu exhaled, his relief visible. I will protect you, Iona. No matter what. As the night fell upon Nola, the two lovers prepared for the most dangerous journey of their lives. They had only a few hours before the entire village would come for them. And by then, they had to be gone. The moon hung high above the village of Nola, casting long shadows across the quiet huts. Tonight was the night. Iona's heart pounded as she carefully gathered her belongings, a small cloth bundle with only the essentials, a handful of dried fruit, a water skin, and the wooden pendant Keanu had given her. Her hands trembled. She was about to leave everything behind. Her father. Her mother. The village she had called home since birth. But she had made her choice. She took a deep breath and silently stepped out of her hut, careful not to wake anyone. The village was asleep. Only the distant howls of the wild dogs and the whisper of the wind accompanied her footsteps as she made her way toward the outskirts. And then she saw him. Keanu stood at the edge of the forest, his bow slung across his back, a small pack of supplies by his feet. His sharp eyes scanned the darkness before resting on her. Iona ran to him, her breath uneven. You came, he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I will always come to you, she whispered. Keanu squeezed her hand, then turned toward the towering trees. We must leave now. Before the village wakes. Iona nodded, casting one last look toward Nola. The place where she had laughed, cried, and grown. And then, without another word, she stepped into the forest. Into the unknown, the trees loomed above them like silent watchers. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the air grew damp, thick with the scent of moss and earth. Strange sounds filled the night, rustling leaves, distant hoot of owls, the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. Iona stayed close to Keanu, her fingers brushing his arm. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Keanu led her along a hidden path, his movements sure and confident. "Far from Nola. There is a valley beyond the hills, near the Great Seneca Falls. Few men go there, it is too wild, too unknown. We will be safe." Iona swallowed hard. The thought of never seeing her family again made her chest ache. But Keanu was her family now. As the hours passed, exhaustion began to weigh on her legs. They had been walking for what felt like an eternity. "Keanu," she breathed, "can we rest?" He stopped and glanced around before leading her to a fallen tree trunk. "We will rest for a short while. But not for long. By sunrise, they will know we are gone." Iona sat beside him, her body aching. Keanu unwrapped a small cloth bundle and handed her a piece of dried meat. She took it gratefully, chewing in silence. The night was quiet except for the sound of the river nearby, its waters rushing gently in the distance. Keanu looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Are you afraid?" Iona hesitated before nodding. "Yes. But not because I regret leaving. I don't know what's ahead." Keanu reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We will find a new home, Iona. I promise." She met his gaze, finding strength in his words. "As long as I am with you, that is enough." For a moment, they simply sat there, two souls bound together by love, surrounded by the vast unknown. But their moment of peace was about to shatter. Back in Nola, the village woke to chaos. Chief Omari stood at the center of the marketplace, his face dark with rage. "Iona is missing," he announced, his voice like thunder. "She has run away with the hunter." Gasps filled the air. Women clutched their chests in shock. Men exchanged looks of disbelief. Barisa, standing beside the chief, clenched his fist. "Then we must bring them back," he spat. "This is an insult to your honor, Chief Omori." The chief's nostrils flared. "Gather the best hunters. We leave at once." And just like that, the hunt began. 10 men, armed with spears and bows, set out into the forest, led by Barisa himself. The sun had not yet risen, but already, Iona and Keanu's time was running out. Unaware of the danger closing in, Keanu and Iona continued their journey. As dawn broke, a golden light filtered through the trees. Iona's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, determined. "We are close," Keanu assured her. "Once we reach Seneca Falls, we can build shelter. We will be safe there." But fate had other plans. Keanu suddenly stopped. His body tensed. Iona saw his fingers tighten around his bow. "What is it?" she whispered. Keanu listened, his sharp ears picking up something she could not hear. Then he cursed under his breath. "They are coming." Iona's blood ran cold. "Who?" Keanu turned to her, urgency flashing in his eyes. "The chief's men. They are tracking us." Panic rose in Iona's chest. "What do we do?" Keanu scanned the forest, his mind racing. He could fight, but they were outnumbered. They needed another plan. And then, he saw it. A narrow path leading toward the river rapids. Dangerous, but their only chance. "We run," Keanu said. "Now." Without hesitation, they took off, their feet pounding against the earth. Behind them, the distant crack of branches signaled their pursuers. The chase had begun. And only one side would win. The air was thick with tension. Iona ran as fast as her legs would carry her, her breath ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, Keanu moved swiftly, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain for a way to shake off their pursuers. The sounds of their hunters grew louder, branches snapping, feet pounding against the earth, voices calling out in the distance. "They're getting closer." Iona gasped. Keanu grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the sound of rushing water. "The river," he shouted. "It's our only way." Ahead, the Zanika River rapids roared like an angry beast. The water was rough and unforgiving, crashing over jagged rocks and twisting through the valley like a wild serpent. Iona's eyes widened. "Keanu, we'll be swept away." "It's the only way to lose them," Keanu said firmly. "Trust me." She hesitated for only a moment. Then she nodded. Without another word, Keanu tightened his grip on her hand, and together, they jumped. The moment they hit the water, Iona was swallowed by the current. The freezing water knocked the breath from her lungs. She tumbled beneath the surface, her body spinning uncontrollably as the river carried her downstream. Panic set in. She fought against the waves, struggling to break free. She couldn't breathe. Then, suddenly, a strong hand grasped her wrist. "Keanu." With all his strength, he pulled her above the surface. "Hold on," he shouted over the roaring waters. Iona gasped for air, coughing as she clung to him. The river carried them further and further, crashing over rocks, spinning them like leaves in a storm. Then, after what felt like forever, the current began to slow. Keanu managed to grab onto a low-hanging branch and pulled them to shore. They collapsed onto the riverbank, soaked and shivering, their bodies aching from the force of the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply lay there, exhausted, listening to the distant shouts of the hunters, now far upstream. They had escaped. But they were not safe yet. Meanwhile, back at the rapids, Barisa and his men stood at the river's edge. They jumped into the water, one of the hunters asked, eyes wide with disbelief. Barosa's face twisted in frustration. "They're desperate." He kicked a loose stone into the river. "But the rapids won't carry them forever." "We continue the search." Spread out along the banks. The men nodded and moved swiftly. Barisa turned toward the trees, his hands tightening into fists. "I will find you, Keanu," he muttered. "And when I do, Iona will be mine." Keanu and Iona moved quickly, knowing the hunters would still be searching for them. "We need to go deeper into the forest," Keanu said, glancing at the sky. "They will expect us to follow the river. But if we head toward the Mistwood Caves, we can hide until they give up the chase." Iona nodded, though exhaustion tugged at her body. Her legs ached, her arms were bruised from the rocks, and her clothes clung to her, heavy with river water. Still, she trusted Keanu. They walked for hours, pushing through thick vines and towering trees. The jungle was alive with the sounds of chopping insects, distant howls, and the rustling of unseen creatures. At last, they reached a small clearing where the land sloped downward into a rocky outcrop. At the base of the cliff, partially hidden by vines, was a dark entrance, the Mistwood Caves. "This will be our shelter," Keanu said, leading her inside. The cave was cool and dry, with a soft floor of packed earth. Keanu quickly gathered leaves and dry wood, striking a flint stone to create a small fire. As the flames flickered, Iona sighed with relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were safe. But for how long? As the fire warmed them, Iona finally turned to Keanu, studying his face in the soft glow. His jaw was tight, his muscles tense. He was still on edge, listening for any sign of danger. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "Keanu," she whispered. "We made it." He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. "For now." Iona searched his eyes. "Do you regret leaving?" He looked at her, and for a moment, the hunter's mask fell away. "I would leave 1,000 villages if it meant being with you," he murmured. Iona's heart swelled. For the first time since their journey began, she felt a flicker of hope. They had faced the wild. They had faced the river. And together, they had survived. But far beyond the jungle, danger was still coming. Barisa was not done hunting. And soon, the final confrontation would begin. The cave provided shelter, but danger still lurked beyond the jungle's edge. Keanu sat by the fire, sharpening the tip of an arrow with slow, deliberate movements. Iona watched him, her heart heavy with both love and fear. "You're thinking," she said softly. Keanu didn't look up. "We are not safe yet." Iona swallowed. She knew he was right. Barisa and his men would not give up so easily. "We cannot keep running forever," she whispered. Keanu paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "No," he agreed. "We cannot." For a long time, they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the jungle hummed with life, the distant calls of night creatures, the rustling of leaves in the wind. Finally, Keanu spoke. "There is only one way this ends." Iona felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean?" Keanu set his blade down and turned to her. "They won't stop hunting us. Not until Barisa has you, or I am dead." Iona's breath caught. "No," she said firmly. "I will not let you face them alone." Keanu cupped her face gently, his tongue brushing her cheek. "You are my heart, Iona. But I must protect you. I will end this, one way or another." Iona's eyes filled with tears. "What if they kill you?" Keanu exhaled, pressing his forehead against hers. "Then know that I died fighting for you." She shook her head. "I cannot lose you." "You won't," he promised. But deep down, she was afraid. Because she knew Keanu was prepared to risk everything. At dawn, the jungle awoke with chaos. The sound of footsteps, many of them, crunched against the forest floor. Birds scattered from the trees, their wings flapping in alarm. Keanu, already awake, grabbed his bow. He could hear them. They were coming. "Iona," he hissed. She jolted awake, immediately sensing the danger in his voice. "They found us?" Keanu nodded. "We don't have much time." He quickly handed her a small dagger. "Take this. If anything happens." Iona grabbed his wrist. "Don't say it." Keanu hesitated, then nodded. Together, they moved swiftly, slipping out of the cave and into the thick jungle. But it was too late. A shout rang through the trees. "There they are." Barosa's men emerged, spears raised, bows drawn. They had them surrounded. And at the center of them all, standing tall with a cross mark on his face, was Barisa himself. "Going somewhere?" he sneered. Keanu stepped protectively in front of Iona, his bow raised. "Let her go, Barisa. This is between you and me." Barisa laughed coldly. "You. A mere hunter. You are nothing, Keanu." Keanu's grip tightened on his bow. "Then fight me. Just you and me. If I win, Iona goes free." Barisa grinned. "And if you lose?" Iona's stomach twisted in fear. Keanu's voice was steady. "Then you take my life." Barosa's eyes gleamed. "So be it." The men stepped back, forming a circle around them. Keanu and Barisa faced each other, weapons in hand. The final battle had begun. Barisa struck first. He lunged forward, his spear slicing through the air. Keanu dodged swiftly, rolling to the side before firing an arrow. Barisa blocked it with his shield, charging again. The two men clashed fiercely, their movements fast, deadly. Keanu struck low, aiming for Barosa's legs, but Barisa was skilled, too skilled. He countered every attack, his smack never fading. "You cannot win, Hunter," Barisa taunted. "You were never meant to have her." Keanu gritted his teeth. "And yet, she chose me." Barosa's expression darkened. With a roar, he swung his spear in a wide arc. Keanu barely dodged, the blade grazing his shoulder. Blood bloomed against his skin. Iona gasped. "Keanu." Keanu stumbled back, breathing hard. The wound stung, but he did not stop. He had one chance. Summoning every last bit of strength, he feinted left, then spun right, using the opening to strike Barosa's arm with his dagger. Barisa yelped, his spear falling to the ground. Keanu wasted no time. He knocked Barisa down, pressing the tip of his blade against his throat. The jungle fell silent. The other hunters froze, awaiting their leader's fate. Keanu's voice was cold. "End this, Barisa. Call off your men." Barosa's chest rose and fell rapidly. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. But then, a cruel smile returned. "You may have won the fight," he rasped. "But do you truly believe my father, Chief Omori, will ever accept this? You will never have peace, Keanu. Not as long as she carries his blood." Iona stepped forward, her voice strong and unshaken. "Then I will no longer be his daughter." Barosa's eyes widened. Iona knelt beside Keanu, her hands resting over his. "I choose Keanu. Not my father, not this village. Him." Barosa's face twisted with rage. But he knew. He had lost. With a defeated growl, he spat at the ground. "Take her, then." Keanu lowered his dagger. Slowly, he stood, pulling Iona to her feet. The hunters stepped aside, parting the way. They had won their freedom, the journey was over. Keanu and Iona, hand in hand, walked away from the battlefield. The jungle welcomed them, the wind whispering its approval. They did not look back. As they disappeared into the trees, they knew one thing for certain: they were free. Their love, tested by fire, had survived. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they would face it together. Forever, the jungle stretched endlessly before them, the trees standing tall like silent guardians. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and wild blossoms. Iona and Keanu had won their freedom, but at a cost. Iona's heart was still pounding from the fight, from the moment she had stood beside Keanu and declared her love before all. She had given up everything. Her family, her home, her identity as the daughter of Chief Omori. But as she looked at Keanu, she knew she had gained something greater. She squeezed his hand. "Where do we go now?" Keanu looked toward the distant hills, where the jungle opened into a valley of mist. "Beyond these trees lies the great Sanika Falls," he said. "Few men have traveled there, it is untouched, hidden. That will be our home." Iona smiled. "Then let's go." And together, they stepped forward, leaving behind the world that had tried to tear them apart. Back in the village of Nola, Chief Omori sat in his hut, staring into the dying embers of the fire. His proudest daughter was gone. His men had returned empty-handed, reporting how Iona had chosen the hunter over her own family. Barisa stood before him, his arm bandaged from his fight with Keanu, rage still burning in his eyes. "She has humiliated you, Chief. Humiliated us all. You must send more men. Hunt them down. Make them pay." Omori exhaled deeply. He was an old man, a man of traditions. He had spent his life ruling with strength, ensuring his bloodline remained powerful. But Iona was not like the others. She had chosen love over duty. And no amount of force would change that. "No," he said at last, his voice weary. "We will let them go." Barosa's eyes widened. "But Chief." Omori raised his hand, silencing him. If she no longer wishes to be my daughter, then I shall not chase a shadow. She has made her choice. He stood, looking toward the night sky. Somewhere, out beyond the trees, Iona was carving a new path, one that no chief, no tradition, could ever break. Omari's heart ached, but deep down, he knew she was where she belonged. It took 3 days for Keanu and Iona to reach Sonica Falls. When they finally emerged from the thick jungle, a breathtaking sight unfolded before them. A towering waterfall cascaded down from the cliffs above, the water glittering in the sunlight. A river stretched across the valley, feeding into a lush, green land untouched by man. Birds soared through the sky, their cries echoing against the rocks. It was a land free of rules. Free of expectations. Free of the chains of the past. Iona stepped forward, letting the mist of the waterfall kiss her skin. She turned to Keanu, tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of joy. "We are home," she whispered. Keanu smiled, pulling her close. "Yes," he said. "Home." Over the years, they built their life together. Keanu hunted in the forest, and Iona gathered wild fruits and herbs. They built a hut near the river, where the sound of the water became their lullaby at night. They lived not as exiles, but as free souls, unbound by tradition, guided only by love. And one day, their story became legend. Generations later, in the village of Nola, an elder sat beneath the great baobab tree, surrounded by children. They listened in wide-eyed wonder as she spoke. "There was once a girl named Iona," she said, "a chief's daughter, bound by tradition. And a hunter named Keanu, a man of the wild. They were never meant to be together, but their love was stronger than fear, stronger than the laws of men." The children leaned in closer, hanging on to every word. And so, they ran away into the wild, where no one could tell them who to be. They found a land untouched by man, a place of peace and freedom. And to this day, if you listen closely, you can hear their whispers in the wind, reminding us all that true love cannot be tamed. The fire crackled. The night was still. And the legend of Iona and Keanu lived on. Forever.